Welcome to Cincinnati's best ever real estate investor mastermind. We are coming to you live on the first Tuesday in April at the Deer Park Community Center. We meet once a month locally, a great group of local and sometimes traveling in from other places, real estate investors, all who invest in the greater Cincinnati market to network, meet people that we need to meet, who have things that we need, things that we have, and to learn from one another, especially when we're able to have a speaker with skills, experience like we have today. For those of you listening on the podcast, the Cincinnati Real Estate Investing Show, welcome. I'm your host, Slocum Reed. We have a great guest, Jeremy Komer, personal friend of mine, fellow Northsider. He's done quite a few real estate deals, including some house flips. I know that he's invested in a handful of neighborhoods in Cincinnati. I know he's had quite a few deals in Northside. The one we're going to be talking about today is Northside. And what I primed you all with about this, Jeremy and I had been talking about this deal ever since he first met with the seller. Went direct to seller with his own lead generation, so all direct to seller negotiation that resulted in splitting a parcel that had two properties on it because the seller thought one was worth more than you did and you wanted the other one more than he did. And then getting that four-family that you wanted rezoned into a 6-unit, and then dealing with the permits and the contractors and all of that rigmarole to get all the inspections passed and get your certificate of occupancy as a 6-unit so you can finally get those rented. So Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit more about your background? Tell us what you've done in real estate investing in the last few years and what brought you to Cincinnati in the first place.
So originally I came to Cincinnati for a job right before COVID around 2018, 2019, to work in aerospace. Obviously that didn't go well in 2020 because we all know what happened next. And as a result of that, I began thinking I need to diversify the way in which I'm supporting myself, looking around and seeing everyone lose their jobs, get cut pretty much without much hesitation from companies. I needed to find something else to do. So I started to get involved in real estate back in 2020, initially just doing the house hack, so the 3.5% down FHA loan. And since then, just continued to do other deals through every way of financing it under the sun. I've done hard money deals, I've done flips, I've done 25% down, I've done 5% down. So you name it, I've found a way to use the financing tool to make something work. And this particular deal here in Northside was a single family and a 4-unit property on the same lot. The lot was very small and one person obviously owned both. And the biggest challenge with this was that this owner thought that the single family is worth a lot more than I did, and I wanted the 4-unit that had been neglected since he redid it back in 2002 while he was working on the single family and renovating it by himself. He essentially hadn't done any work on this other one in 20 years, and it was starting to show some of that neglect.
The other thing, for those of you in the room right now, please raise your hand when you have the question because we're going to move through a lot of topics with this deal. We'd much rather hear your question about the topic when it gets raised. And it's my responsibility to make sure that we get all the way through the deal in this conversation, in this interview. So please raise your hand. We do have the crowd mic. Jeremy and I have mics. We can get it passed around. We will stick this in your face so that we get your question recorded on the podcast. So let's start with how you met the seller and how that negotiation came about.
The way I met the seller was just happenstance and just trying to make the connection with somebody you meet at random. So I was actually walking down the street later in the evening with my wife at the time, and he came out of the basement covered in dust, was clearly not having a great day. And I think I made some sort of joke about like, oh, it's a rough one today, huh? And just started talking to him, figuring at the time it's either a contractor or an owner, and either way I need both. So it's a great connection to make. So I ended up exchanging numbers at the time, wasn't really interested in selling. This was probably about 3 years ago at the time, so it was quite a long time ago. I just kept following up with them every few months, just saying, hey, how are you doing? How's that working out for you? Is this something you would be interested in selling? You get rejected many times, but after about a year of following up every month or two with them, he eventually said, I think I'm ready to sell these two. I think it's something that I want to move on. I want to retire. I'm just tired of dealing with it. So ended up meeting with him, having several rounds of going back and forth on the best way to make this work. Because when you have a single family and a 4-family together on one lot, you can't get your normal 25% down type of financing. You're now looking at commercial loans, which complicates things a bit, as well as finding a lender that's okay with this type of structure can be a little more complicated. After going through several rounds of trying to find ways to make the financing work, I realized the best way to do this was probably to separate the two out. The valuation, what he felt like he could go and sell that single family for once he was finished with it, was a lot more than what I thought he could get, so I could tell it worth a lot more to him than it was to me. So I ended up discussing with him, if I could separate these two for you, I'll deal with the city, I'll do all the work. If the city tells me no, I'm just out the money that I spent on trying to make it happen. If I take on that risk, this price is what I want to buy the 4-unit for, and you just keep the single family. It was something that he said, you know what, that works great for me as long as I don't have to do the work. I'm not taking the risk of spending the money on surveys, applications, permits in the city. Sounds good to me. So that's how that one ended up coming together.
You had the agreement with the seller that you had your terms in advance, but you were not required to close until after you knew that splitting the parcels was approved.
Correct.
I want to come back to that. A couple of things here. One of them is specific to Northside. It is a fairly dense, majority single-family neighborhood now. Most of them were originally multifamily. There's a term that I've been told to use. It was mostly tenement housing. Right after the Civil War, there was a massive industry boom in Cincinnati, a population boom, and so they were just trying to throw houses together as fast as they could for people to live in. So most of the single families that we have in Northside now were originally 2 or 3 families, 1 per floor, that when plumbing came in, they all started sharing 1 bathroom and 1 kitchen, and then they each got a bathroom, but they never each got a kitchen. It was a single family by then. One of the things that means is there's very little off-street parking. You don't have enough room for a driveway between the houses, and a lot of those streets don't have proper alleys behind, or the alley isn't parkable. It's basically just for foot traffic. And when you go into look for comps, there's a massive difference between the houses that do and don't have off-street parking. It's a really easy mistake to make as an investor, to miss the fact that the house that you're looking at doesn't have a place to park, so you're stuck with on-street. It's also easy to miss as a landlord, thinking about what amenities matter to tenants. Off-street parking is a huge one. And that house, I know for a fact, no off-street parking, teeny tiny lot. So that was one of the things, I think, you already knew this, Jeremy, but that's one of the things I was telling you, is that you're going to struggle to sell it, and you're going to have to sell it for less than this guy thinks because it doesn't have the parking, and he wants to comp it with the ones that have driveways, and some of them have garages. Yeah. Let's talk about the process of getting the parcel split. So you said you applied, it was your money. Give us more of the step-by-step of how that came about.
Absolutely. So in the city of Cincinnati, the zoning for this particular area is what's called SF2. So it's single family zoning with a 2,000 square foot minimum lot size. Neither of these, if you split them, are going to conform to that zoning requirement. That's considered a major zoning change in the city of Cincinnati, meaning you have to go in front of the zoning committee for a vote. In order to prepare for that vote, you have to come and get a survey of your property, show where you're going to have that split done, and then you have to also go through what's called the joint coordinated site review for the property. And that's where you have your fire department, your sewer, your water, your police. Basically, every city department gets together to review it, say, do we have any problem with subdividing this land? Is it going to cause issues for any of us?
Are you paying all those agencies to come give an opinion on this?
Yes, through an application fee. So it's $500 per lot that you have to pay for the right to apply.
So when you start with 1 and you end up with 2, is that 500 or 1,000?
That's 1,000.
Okay.
So it's 1,000 minimum if you want to think about it that way. You do pay for the site review, and they can tell you no. So that's part of the risk of this. Is
the survey is separate?
The survey is separate. So the survey can run you usually another $1,000 or $2,000 depending on what type of survey you need. Each one's different, can be more or less complicated. So you can easily be $2,000, $3,000 into this process pretty quickly, and the city can just tell you, no, we're not going to let you subdivide this land. It doesn't work for this neighborhood, doesn't work for us, for any reason they want to come up with. And that's part of the risk of the process.
So you go in front of zoning. Did everything pass the first time? Did you have any issues?
The issue we ended up finding was that the sewer lines were connected. So MSD came back and said, according to our information we have, both of these single family and the 4-family share a sewer line and a water line. So they have one water meter for both properties. Ended up going back to the seller and negotiating and say, hey, I want to keep my price the same, but I did not anticipate having to pay for a new sewer line, a new water line. And he ended up saying, yeah, that's fine. I would have to do it anyway for my property. And he ended up agreeing to pay for it in order to keep things on time as long as I could close when we had originally said.
You said that was zoned as SF2, right?
Yes.
So that's a single family. So how did the owner have a single family and a multifamily? He had the other 4 units, right?
Yes.
So how did he initially manage to have 2 properties in one lot, which is zoned as SF2?
A lot of times these surveys and divisions were done decades ago. So it was grandfathered in from a past survey. The city couldn't exactly tell me when it happened or why it happened. The furthest record they had back for this property was the 80s, in which they could see they were still joined on one lot, and that front building had actually been a storefront at the time.
Oh, so it's front and back like
Yeah.
that. Okay, so it makes sense.
The 4-family that we're talking about, can I talk about the location?
Yeah.
It's on Chase Avenue, just a couple blocks off of Chase and Hamilton, and kind of classic for Northside. I did not grow up in Cincinnati, but I know people our age who grew up in Northside, and a lot of those buildings, straight up brick, 3 stories, usually 3, sometimes 2 stories, that look like they were retail storefronts in the front. There used to be an App Jones Pizza that people our age went to when they were kids to get pizza. They were all storefronts. And so we're talking about one of those buildings right now where it's 3 stories. Someone decades ago took that storefront and converted it into an apartment because the desire for retail in those locations went away. But also, Northside as a neighborhood was being built in the late 19th century. So a lot of Northside has the year built of 1890, because in 1890 there was a labor riot that burned the records office. So that's just as far as most of the records for Northside and Clifton go. So we're talking about stuff that existed prior to zoning. So every single parcel in that part of Northside is going to be zoned single family just because they created that zoning over a century after some of this stuff was built. Couple of things. What timeline did you give yourself to close, from contract to close, on this deal that the seller wanted to keep?
I think we had an original timeline of 6 months on this.
6 months to close.
To close on it. To get through
Okay.
all the process, it couldn't take longer than 6 months.
And the seller was willing to eat the cost of splitting water and sewer in order to keep you on time.
Yeah, he just didn't want to be out the money for an extended period of time. He
Yeah,
wanted it to be
okay.
covered by closing.
2 to 3 grand, and the only part of your due diligence that you've paid for is figuring out whether or not you can split the parcel. What made this deal good enough that you were willing to spend that kind of money in due diligence, plus the other due diligence efforts and money that you had to spend? What is it about this deal that made it good enough to do that?
A lot of the plumbing and electric on this building was redone back in 2002. So it's rare in these 1800s buildings to have modern mechanical systems. And the fact that I was working with a building that had already seen that significant renovation 20 years ago made me feel much better about the type of renter and the type of rent I'm going to be getting from a building that has modern electric, modern plumbing, modern HVAC systems, as well as just didn't have a lot of the plaster walls or other issues that come with older buildings. Just the overall interior condition of what was done 20 years ago was much easier to work with. And the location as well.
Another thing you haven't said yet is, were you intending from the beginning to convert the 4-family into a 6-unit?
No, actually, it was not my original intention when I first came to the property. It's about a few months before I was closing, I started to have this realization, going back through some of the records, that it used to be 7 units, and that with the access to mechanicals on the first floor, it would not be that difficult to change the single unit that occupied the entire first floor of this building into 3 separate units. And after running some cost analysis on it and getting some prices from contractors, it just made a lot of sense to go through that process.
Before we move into the other things that you had to tackle, give us an idea, ideally both what you pro forma at the beginning, but also what actually happened. The cost of converting the 1 unit into 3 and what doing that did to the value of the property.
Absolutely. So the property value went up 30-40% by going from 4 units to 6 units. So it was a pretty significant increase in the value, primarily because of the way the property would be valued changed. Going from comps of a 4 unit, of which was very limited in the neighborhood, but you do that square foot adjustment, the rent adjustment, try to get there, versus a cap rate value at 6 units, and with the additional rent, made value much higher on the building. As far as cost go, the interior renovation cost was probably around $130,000, $140,000 for that portion alone. I took more of the approach of, hi, my name's Jeremy, I'm your neighbor. I live here as well in this neighborhood. I'm part of your community. I want to do this project. This is not a faceless corporation coming in to do this. This is somebody that lives here.
So you've got your zoning variance approved. What's next?
After your plans are approved, the zoning examiner will issue you a letter of approval and a case number. So that case number is how you end up going to get your permits. So if you go to try and pull these permits for these modifications down at the permitting department, they'll tell you no, you don't have zoning permission to have this many units there. It doesn't make any sense. But this case number is essentially their code that says, hey, the planning examiner said this was okay. They can look that up. That takes another week or two to get that letter from them.
I know that you hired a general contractor. Are you pulling the permits yourself, or did you let the GC do that?
It's a mixture of both. So the GC handled the things that I felt like he was strongest at, and I handled some things that I felt like I was more uniquely positioned for. Hiring you for HVAC, I felt like it was a better value add than the type of thing he would bring. I handled a lot of the exterior stuff as well. There's a lot of historic pieces on the exterior that I wanted to take additional care with, and finding the right suppliers and right sources to handle, not just whoever you could find to do it. And it just made more sense to do it that way.
For the record, that was a shameless plug for TLP HVAC, my company. We actually did the mini split HVAC installs for him on his 3 first floor units, and we pulled our own permit for that. So, real quick, before you go to the building department, how long had you owned the property and been working on this?
It's tough to remember because this has been several years. I've owned the property in 2 years, start to finish, from the point of buying it to completing the renovation and everything. So it's been a long time. It's probably somewhere around 8 months at this point, if I'm trying to remember correctly.
So you're 8 months in before you can pull the permits. Yep. Throughout that time, though, you've had 3 rentable units. You told me you had some tenant turnover, but the rest of the building was still capable of generating revenue for you. So it's not like you're dealing with an empty building for 2 years.
They were able to handle at that point, for most of that time, the holding costs of things they were able to handle.
So you were break even on it while you were waiting on this process to work out for these 3 units. That's nice. That's awesome, actually. I know some people in the room and a lot of our listeners are not all that familiar with the process of pulling permits with the building department. Of all of the tricky parts of this deal, this one is the simplest and the most common. So instead of going through step by step, can you tell us, specific to working through the building department for the permits, inspections, getting all of that closed out to get your certificate of occupancy, what were the biggest surprises for you in that process, both positive and negative?
I think the biggest surprise was just dealing with commercial code. My experience up until this point had been 1 to 4 units that is looked at differently from inspectors than something that's now commercial. They're just a lot more thorough on buildings like this, especially when you're doing this much to it. In the past, for instance, when I've pulled permits on like single families, I'm able to take measurements, do drawings myself, and do that kind of thing, and they're okay with it. In this case, they want a lot more professional credentials attached to your plans. They want to see that an engineer or an architect has looked at things and said it's okay. They don't trust you to just do it on your own. You can't pull owner's permits, so if you happen to live in it, that's just not an option anymore. It's commercial. They'll do a lot more with things like fire blocking that I wasn't necessarily aware of. So they're much more thorough on making sure that you have the right fire blocking, not only between the apartments, but even in the basement. So as part of this, I was required to drywall the basement. There's nothing in the basement, but that's the fire blocking code that is required. They'll require a lot of small things, like for instance, near HVAC units, you have to have a functional outlet. That is not something that they required on 1 unit, 2 units, or 3 units in the past. So they will be very thorough. They will fail you for things like that. So you got to make sure that you're on top of it. Make sure your GC as well is super familiar with these things so they aren't missing things as well.
I had a buddy a few years ago call me freaking out because they didn't realize that the city of Cincinnati was going to require that they drywall the ceiling in their 4-family because they consider 4-family commercial because it's Cincinnati. So they called me freaking out. I wasn't their GC. They weren't working with me. They were working with somebody else, but they knew that I had crews. And at the time I needed to keep them busy. So we ended up just to the point of having it taped for the purposes of fire stop. We ended up doing that for them. So biggest surprise was the difference between commercial and residential code and the level of detail that they go to. What else?
That's just about it as far as like the biggest surprises I end up having with just the permitting process in general, not being able to pull my own permits, not being able to issue drawings and things myself, having to have more professional credentials attached to things like an engineer and architect, and then just the thoroughness they would go through things. I noticed the inspectors spent a lot more time on site going through this property than they did necessarily some of the smaller single families or duplexes.
Let's give another shameless plug here. Not for me. You referred me to Jim Ritter, right? We just used him to do the MEP drawings for 12 unit where we have 3 downed units from a fire a few years ago. We just took over in the past year. So we used him for that. The experience working with him was so good. And he's an architect and he deserves to be well paid, but he came in pretty affordably for an architect. So I'm going to use him on a single family here soon. It's a large project. We're moving the kitchen, moving a bathroom. So I'm going to have him do all the drawings just to make it easier for me to work with my own contractors and have these plans and say this is exactly how it has to look when you're done. So shout out to Jim Ritter. I don't remember his company's name.
It's Professional Design Associates. And Jim owns his own apartment buildings as well. So he's done this for himself. He's very knowledgeable.
Yeah. If you Google him and can't find him, reach out to me. You can Google me and find me. I'll give you his info. Start to finish, you said you spent around 130 on the interior remodel. So you spend 130. You're talking about general, mechanical for HVAC, electric and plumbing permits. You're talking about a general contractor, a bevy of subcontractors. How long did that process take?
The interior renovation took about a year on its own. The exterior parts were probably about another 6 to 8 months. And that was really the cavalcade of different contractors to find things that
And
worked.
additional 6 to 8, or was it happening concurrently?
That was happening while I was waiting for the zoning approval. Because that was stuff that I knew I didn't have to wait on. I knew I was going to do anyway. So focused on making sure I was getting those things done while I was waiting for zoning to complete there.
I remember when this was happening because we can see this building from Fergus Park where I take my girls to swing on swings. You had to shut down sidewalks. What kind of permits did you have to get for shutting down sidewalks? You had to park some equipment in the street too, didn't you?
Yes. So Trey Gulling was the contractor. He is a small GC company here in Cincinnati. And it was just talking to him about his guys could do a lot of the painting and work that needed to be done up high, as well as he had a mason that could do the masonry work that was required. So I ended up working with him on finding how to get a DOT permit. So you have to pull a permit with
DOD.
Department of Transportation, DOT.
DOT.
Yeah. Department of Transportation permit to essentially block a sidewalk or a street, which required a large bond. I think that was a $750 bond you had to have with them on top of the insurance and everything else. So that was a little bit of a long process, also waiting for that. If you notice there's a pattern, there's a lot of apply for something, pay some money and wait. That happens a lot.
Yeah, and 2 years later, you can finally get these apartments occupied. So looking over the entire 2-year process now, what actually was easier or smoother than you expected?
I expected things to go much smoother than they did. When you want it bad enough, you find a way to make things happen.
What was a lot more difficult or time consuming than expected? Aside from everything, but like in particular, what were the trickiest parts of this that caught you by surprise?
Definitely the zoning. How long it took to get through the zoning process caught me by surprise. I really thought that would be a pretty quick process to essentially go through the reviews, maybe take a month or two and be done, not 7-8 months, go through several committees, just the level of stringency that they would want to evaluate and the number of eyes they would want on something like this.
I had a quick question. You mentioned when you purchased it from the previous owner and you split that parcel in half, that you had to get the water and sewer lines separated. Did you get different meters for it being the 4-family, or did you go ahead and make moves based on the 6-family? How did that turn out? Or did you just have one for the whole building?
This one's just one for the whole building.
Okay.
Without getting too into the weeds on the numbers, big picture here, a 2-year process, you mitigated a lot of your risk by being able to get through subparceling the property and dealing with the plumbing, the water supply and sewer before even closing. In this 2-year process, throughout the entire time, you had the second and third floors, 3 apartments that were rentable, they were revenue producing, and keeping you break even on holding costs. I think you're going to be barely under $150,000 with all of the costs that we've discussed here. However, through this process, while having the other 3 units to cover your carry costs, you increase the value of the property that you purchased by a multiple on that 150. So I assume you'd say totally worth it. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely totally worth it. Obviously, I'd be more prepared knowing what I know now, but I would absolutely go through this process again.
Well, that's the next question, Jeremy. If the numbers on this deal being what they are now that you've done it, would you do this property again?
Yeah, I would definitely do this again.
Yeah.
This has worked out really well, not only from a financial perspective, but also the pride you feel owning a building that looks this way, that has these kind of historic details, is like right there on a prominent street corner. It's a really unique opportunity. And that's part of my thinking at the time was also, I may not get another opportunity to buy something like this.
There's also something to be said for the education that you receive going through that. I took over management of a very problematic 10-unit third-party management in a problematic part of Over the Rhine. At least it was problematic when I took it over. One of the first times I went to the property after I took over management, I was accompanied by the building department, the health department, the police department, a reporter, and the health department and the building department both brought trainees with them because they wanted this to be an example property, and they just all went through all of their issues, just gave us a list of everything, checked on everything that they had already issued violations on, including the police department. And then on someone else's dime, because I was the third-party property manager, I had the opportunity to figure out how to clear up all of those violations, work with all of those organizations, get everyone off of the landlord's back. And now, when I look at acquiring a single family or a 4-family that has a few building violations on it from last year, it's no big deal. I've been through this before. So kudos to you going through with it, but also for making money on this one, because I know there was a lot of hair on it and you weren't always this confident about how it was going to go.
Okay, final question. Did you burr out of it? Because if you added that much value, did you let the equity sit, or what did you do?
The exterior renovation money I left in it in order to get cash flow. Just part of my long-term strategy and where I'm trying to go with real estate is get out of a W-2 job like a lot of people are. So the cash flow is how you get there. The interior renovation money was refinanced out through the Community Trust Bank.
So you refied after you completed the deal, or that's just part of the construction loan?
It was part of the construction loan, was the $130 I spent on the inside.
Awesome. Jeremy, thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Those of you who are in attendance live, we'll have a little bit more time to hang out, eat pizza, chat. Please do come up and talk to Jeremy, ask him the questions that you didn't feel like asking on a microphone in front of everyone. Listeners, thank you all as well for being here. If you gained value from this episode, please do subscribe to our show. Leave us a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend who you know will gain value from hearing all the things that Jeremy had to do to this property in Northside to increase cash flow, force appreciation, add housing to the neighborhood, and make his way towards financial freedom. Thank you all, and I will talk to you next week.